Hi, I want to make a video about cognitive dissonance and your perception of yourself and how you want to view yourself in this life game that we're playing. How you have self-perceptions, egos, it's driving your gratification to feel like you're doing the thing that you want to do the way you want to do it. You have expectations, you have tendencies, you have um, this cognitive dissonance. You have, say, something like an obsession about how you want to view yourself, a perception based on what you do in principles and things like that. So. A good example would be something like going back to the last video I made, and it goes onto this idea of thinking and how you think and moving one thoughts to another, putting your thoughts behind you and not letting your thoughts get to you, and not letting your perception get too much control of you. About saying choose to say. Choosing to self-gratify your ego as opposed to getting something like a survival mechanism, sort of like surviving or self-satisfying your ego to make sure that you can feel good about yourself. But if you don't satisfy your ego, you sort of lose your will to drive to move forward because you have nothing motivating you. And then obviously to survive you have to do something else, and if you don't do that something else you can't survive. So it's this kind of thing where it's trying to drive in either direction, especially if those two things contradict each other. So it's about this perception that you have when it comes to how you view yourself and how you view yourself in certain circumstances. And I think this may come down to psychology, but the psychology is all we have. Psychology is all we have, so psychology is just as important as anything else, because our psychology is the very foundation of what makes us exist, what makes us perceive, and it's the only thing that means anything that's interacting with this world. This neurology, the psychology, the neurology that lets us sense the world, and the psychology that comes on, the extra baggage of psychology that comes along with it, that makes it have any meaning, that gives us the deprivation to drive us forward, that gives us momentum to move forward towards something more, only to lead to another deprivation, and so on and so forth, back to the same old mechanism driving the forces of life moving forward. That's exactly the thing that's going on here, and our part of that is our ego and our self-perception and our projections of value onto other things and how we view ourselves in interaction with these things. And I think it has a lot to do with ego and your principles and your perception of yourself and how you view other people and yourself and your interactions and how you view other people's interactions with you and so on and so forth. How you look at other people's perceptions and you sort of integrate yourself into their perception and think how you would think if you were looking at yourself from their point of view. So it's one of those things like that. I guess this could come down to a psychology kind of thing. So it comes, so say like you have principles where you can't take, there's money on the floor and the money belongs to someone. You can either take it or you can give it back. So you have this self-gratifying perception where you want to feel good, and you're always satisfying some kind of ego gratification, but you can always put that to the wayside and you can almost forget it, especially say when you're not feeling good and you let your ego aside and you just do it because you understand how bad things can be. You understand that circumstance you wouldn't want to be you, so it's not always your ego driving you. It's just this principle, this thing that's driving you. There's other aspects, other mechanisms at work that are making you do it, such as understanding, an internal perception of ethics and things that are driving you to do to do the thing that you feel is best for someone else and how you would want to be treated as well. And I guess you can say that's how ego works, but it's also understanding someone else's suffering based on your understanding of suffering. So it doesn't necessarily come down to you experiencing you wouldn't want it happening to yourself, but understanding someone else's suffering in their own circumstance. And that's obviously something else. It doesn't always have to come down to you experiencing something and feeling empathy because it's something that you wouldn't want happening to yourself. Your personal preferences, your personal perception, how you want to associate yourself, how you have these associations and these things like that, and how you and perceive yourself. I'm sorry. I'm just doing this off the top of my head. I just have an idea down. I'm just trying to go off from there. And it causes, and there's this cognitive dissonance, especially when these two things can contradict when it comes to your principles, or ego and self-gratification and things like that. When looking through other people's point of view, say if you're in a social situation, how you can think about how they may be perceiving you and how you would want yourself to be perceived by looking through their point of view and looking back at yourself and seeing some of this self-awareness that you can have. and viewing yourself and how you interact with other people and things like that. So you can almost say it's sort of like OCD, obsessive-compulsive disorder, where you're constantly thinking about other people, constantly doing the right things the right way, and not based on necessarily on your own principles, but based on this idea of this is the way I view myself. I've already written a narrative for myself, and everything seems misplaced if I don't have that narrative perfectly in the way it seems. Otherwise, it just doesn't fit right, and it causes distress. And it causes all sorts of problems because it doesn't fit exactly with what you've already perceived, what you expect. But obviously it's just the perception that you have in your head. But that means something because that perception is exactly the thing driving this force, this game moving forward, that gives life any meaning, this interaction, like I said before, because this is part of the reality, and this reality, this perception, this thing in the reality is having an interaction with the things outside this reality and causing a certain perception, a certain point of view, giving senses to a certain degree, to a certain level, based on the mechanism, based on how powerful the mechanism is working, driving the force, such as your brain, your senses, and how they interact. So your smell interacting with the environment based on the perception that you have, based on this neurology you have, interacting with the environment around you. So on sight, touch, smell, hearing, and things like that, and all sorts of senses, thinking, perceiving, projecting value onto things, interacting with things, physically or psychologically, such as music, or physically by touching something, or looking at something, or hearing something, or smelling something, or by eating something that you smell and interacting with the world that way, by smelling something you like the smell, and then you eat it because you like the smell, and seeing and interacting with that, taking one step at a time, using the smell to and see if you like the smell of some food, and you decide to eat it based on the senses that your one sense tells you, then using your other sense to, such as taste, to feed the mechanism based on your perception and things like that, and taking one perception that you have, or one sense that you have based on this perception, and using that to feed another perception, let your other perception see if it does the same thing or has a similar effect on that perception, similar effect on the way that perception perceives things as it did on the other perception. So that's another way of looking at it. And I do apologize, I am going off on a limb again, but I just want to make sure I connect all these ideas together. And I think that's all I need to say. But I think I might want to mention one more thing. This very fleeting nature of life that we're living in. So we're living in a very fleeting kind of, where things are constantly moving and things like that. And I mentioned like thinking and moving forward based on your thinking out. Everything keeps on moving forward. And that's exactly the mechanism that's driving us. And you're almost putting all sorts of meaningful things, the meaning that gives us our life worth, that makes our life, our existence, have anything from our point of view, disregarding the end and the beginning, living in the moment, and living moving forward, and based on this momentum that's driving us. The very thing that makes it worth living is things that we let go of, such as letting go of a thought or something, an experience, and letting go of that experience makes it easier for you to move forward. But letting go of that experience obviously was hard to begin with. So why would letting go of it be so easy? Is to let you move forward, and obviously being a weight off your shoulder when it comes to moving forward. Is that a way I want to word it? I don't know if I'm making sense, but it comes down to the idea that we're constantly moving forward, and one thought leads to another thought. And these thoughts become a thing of the past, and letting go of those things, it's a constantly fleeting movement thing, where we're constantly letting thoughts go to the past. And this comes back to the idea of don't letting your ego or your idea of yourself get in the way of having a reasonable expectation. And it's sort of like this idea, don't get the perfect get in the way of the good enough, and sort of like that. And that comes back to your self-perception and how you want to interact with other people. Don't let the idea of something different happening perfect, a perception you have of doing something, sort of back to this projection of you doing something. It's just a projection in your mind, and it's nothing beyond your projection. It means something, it's your perception, but it's obviously just a projection, a thought process, based on this physical process of the interaction based on the perception you have of the interaction in the environment, which gives you in these experiences you have in this environment, allowing you to have this perception to begin with, and you're projecting that onto the real world by using your imagination to use that as a guiding force as to some kind of thing that you may do in the future. You're thinking about doing, you're considering, or looking back and using that and correcting for your mistakes or something like that. So you're just projecting your own thoughts and your feelings and your expectations of yourself into the world, and it could stop there. And because you view yourself as projecting something onto the world, you view it that is if you have to follow through with that. That doesn't mean you have to, and you're not all of a sudden not living up. You obviously have to consider outcomes, but disregarding the possibility of outcomes and the butterfly effect and things moving and having a negative outcome, regardless of your intentions. And it comes to this self-gratification based on the circumstances in a closed environment at hand from your own perception moving forward into perceiving how you view a certain circumstance. And say you imagine yourself, you look at something, you imagine yourself walking over to the end and doing something, or you can just walk away. You can just as easily imagine yourself walking away, but the perception that overpowers you is walking over to some other place and going to the end of the room. Like I said, the first thing is walking over there and doing something as opposed to walking away. But you can just as much as imagine walking away and having not that degrade your psychology, thinking that you missed out on doing something, that your life's less complete because you didn't do the thing that you thought of, at least beforehand, or doing something that you perceive as more when walking away can have been just as much as the perception that you have of doing more by going over there and going back and fixing some kind of problem you may have thought you haven't fixed, and going back there would fix the problem, or more likely it's just a projection that you have moving forward based on your ego gratification, feeling like you're living more of a full life. And this is back to the basic point I wanted to make in this video, is pushing forward and not letting, because it's just a projection in your head. You're imagining things are happening. What the reality right now is you're just sitting there thinking about it. The projection you have is just a projection. Living through with it could, once you decide to walk away, that's the way things were going to happen. You can always go out and do it again and decide to make a decision, but at that very point, it's just a projection. You're pushing forward, and you are, I'm trying to find the best way to describe this. You're pushing forward, and obviously you just say you're just sitting there thinking about it for a few seconds, what you should do, and then you think about that option, then you just think about another option and how that can work out, or more options, multiple options, and perceiving. And it comes back to this ego thing, this gratifying, this association, how you view yourself, how you want to view yourself. You can go over there and pet the dog, or you can walk away. You're looking at the dog, you say, well, I'm already here, why don't I just go out and pet the dog? And then you go and pet the dog, or you can walk away. You can perceive the walking away as something just as valuable as going to pet the dog. And if you don't pet the dog, it almost feels like it's incomplete if you don't go pet the dog and you just walk away. You feel like you've let the dog down, you've let your ego down, you've let the completeness of the world that you feel like you're gratifying by doing something you perceive to be more, by doing that extra thing, but in reality walking away would have been just as extra. So this really does come down to something sort of like OCD, and perceiving things and looking at every single outcome and thinking of every single outcome and thinking how everything has to be right the way that your perception wants you to feel like it's the first driving force, the initial visceral feeling or visceral option that you put, or visceral thought can push you in that kind of direction. But it's always about considering other options, not letting that get to you, because it is just a projection you have, and following through that projection doesn't mean that you're missing out on something, because you're just sitting there and you can have just easily done something else, and that's just the way the thing was flowing. And you can obviously, that decision not to go through can lead to something even more, and implications leading to something else, and so on and so forth. Obviously, learning from mistakes leads you to prevent those mistakes in the future, and if you learn it sooner, and that's a good thing, but learning it later could be just as good. Learning it sooner could be just as good. Learning a lesson could be just as good. Learning the lesson is just as good as not making the mistake to begin with. So learning the lesson could, and say if you didn't make the mistake to begin with, and you didn't learn the lesson, you would learn the lesson later on, maybe eventually, and if you didn't, you just got lucky. But learning the lesson can obviously lead to something better based on learning a lesson, giving a new perception of how things are working, and that can make things change for the better, and it prevents you and it helps you change the circumstances that have happened before, and it makes you look back, and it makes you help make better decisions in the future moving forward. While if you never made the mistake to begin with, then you would either learn the mistake later on, even worse, more severe, after, continually, say, making something worse and worse, and finally learning the mistake once you've made it really bad, and it's almost irreversible at this point. It's better to learn it early, and learn it and help it maybe. Better to learning earlier than not learning it at all, because if you don't learn it at all, it can either lead to a greater mistake in the future, learning it in any way in the future, learning it eventually, or you never really understand the full context of every possible, outcome that can happen based on your decision to do one thing or the other. So learning mistakes later on, just learning the mistake at all can obviously help, regardless of when later on and so on. Just learning the mistake, period, can help you make better decisions in the future, while not learning the mistake can help you. You either get lucky by continuing to make the right decisions, or you get lucky. You learn the mistake later on, if in context of some kind of time gap between learning a mistake. But about making the mistake or not making the mistake, or learning a lesson, can help you make better decisions and lead to something better in the end, other than if you didn't learn them from the mistake to begin with. So I think I made my points clear enough. I don't want to go on any longer. This video's been long enough. So thank you, and until next time, bye.